Hello, Sean, and my fellow classmates in this course, Engaging the Bible. I have chosen to exegete Mark 10:13 through 16. I will expound upon the following exegetical components of my selected text. 1. The literary context. 2. I will compare my selected passage within three different versions of the Bible: the New International Version, the King James Version, and the New Revised Standard Version, updated edition. 3. I will describe the historical and geographical context. I will elaborate on the literary narrative or genre of my selected passage. 5. I will explain the ancient human situation occurring at the time of my selected passage. 6. I will interpret the message of my selected passage. 7. I will explain my view that my selected passage gives of God, humankind, and the world. I will contrast my selected passage with our modern worldview and the ancient situation. And 9. I will explain the meaning of my selected passage for today and how the passage addresses the current human situation. Now I will expound upon the literary context of this passage. Jesus is trying to get his disciples to understand who he is, which is the Messiah. At the beginning of Mark 10, the Pharisees test Jesus with a question about divorce, and later Jesus must explain his words to his hard-headed disciples. Later, Jesus must still explain his words to his disciples about the difficulty the rich face in inheriting the kingdom of God. Then, after Jesus tells his disciples for the third time about his impending death and resurrection, two of his disciples ask him to appoint one of them to sit at his right hand and the other to sit at his left in his glory. Ultimately, Jesus tells all the disciples that they are to become servants and to even lay down their lives as he has been instructing them that he will eventually lay down his life, which Mark quoted Jesus as saying, "For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many." Also, Mark sets the passage, Mark 10:13 through 16, in contrast to the rich, for whom it is hard to enter the kingdom of God, an obvious shock to the disciples who assume the rich have God's blessing. Next, I will compare my selected passage across the three versions of the Bible I chose. Upon comparing the three different Bible versions of my selected passage with the NIV, the KJV, and the NRSVUE, there is no real significant difference except for the words place his hands and touch, which are particularly notable. The significance difference is in the NIV's use of place his hands as opposed to the KJV and NSRVUE's use of touch. The NIV's use place his hands is more significant, whereas place his hands is more than just a touch. Now I will move on to describe the historical and geographical context of my selected passage. The historical context of the passage, Mark 10:13 through 16, is shortly before Jesus' crucifixion, as Jesus is making his way towards Jerusalem, where he will be crucified. The book of Mark geographically places Jesus in the region of Judea and beyond the Jordan. Now I will move on to elaborate on the literary narrative or genre of my selected passage. The genre of Jesus blessing children in Mark 10 is a gospel narrative. The writer conveys to us in this narrative Jesus' love for us and his teaching on the kingdom of God. Previously in Mark 9:36 through 37, Jesus takes a child in his arms and tells his disciple, "Whoever welcomes one of these little children in my name welcomes me." Therefore, in Mark 10, when the disciples rebuke people bringing children to Jesus for blessing, they should have known that Jesus welcomed children from his teaching in Mark 9, but apparently they were not listening or understanding. Furthermore, in Mark 9:37, Jesus teaches about the kingdom of God when he says, "Whoever welcomes me does not welcome me, but the one who sent me." When Jesus rebukes the disciples for sternly trying to stop people bringing children to him, he equates the kingdom of God with the simple faith of little children, and that one must receive the kingdom of God like a little child. Now I will explain the ancient human situation occurring at the time of my selected passage. Mark 10:13 through 16 addresses the ancient human experience of children being considered unimportant. Jesus demonstrates to the people and the disciples that children are important and deserve all the attention and love of their parents and the community. Children are essential to the kingdom of God, and as models of the kingdom of God, as Jesus said, for the kingdom of God belongs to such as these. Next, I will interpret the message of my selected passage. The basic message of the passage, Mark 10:13 through 16, is that the gift of salvation that Jesus offers us is a gift that must be asked for with the simple humility of a child. Then, after receiving the immense gift of salvation from our Jesus, we must continue with the humility of a child to learn about the kingdom of God and how best to serve God and obey God. It says in 1 Peter 2:2, like newborn babies, crave pure spiritual milk so that by it you may grow up in your salvation. Now I will explain my view of what my selected passage says about God, humankind, and the world. My selected passage, Mark 10:13 through 16, aligns with my view of God, which is that God is love. God is all about family and community and securing a covenant relationship with us in his kingdom. Grant Osborne states children are models for discipleships as they are exemplars of true discipleship in their complete trust, dependence, and openness to him. Osborne's statement aligns with Jesus' commandment, love your neighbor as yourself, which is the exact opposite of the world's view. To be successful, you have to be selfish or else you will never achieve. Humankind tends to be selfish, but within the kingdom of God, there is no room for selfishness. Whereas children, on the other hand, tend to be unselfish and love unconditionally, which is exactly what I believe is expected of us believers to enter the kingdom of God. Now I will contrast my selected passage with our modern worldview and the ancient situation. The contemporary situation of children within society is that they are extremely important, in contrast to the ancient situation where children were often marginalized. Grant Osborne stated to Gentiles, children were only important in carrying on the family dynasty. The Jews gave children a much higher place, but still they were considered more a burden than a blessing. Children today are considered a blessing, but there is still a plethora of dysfunctional practices within families that can harm children and even worse in some countries. In our world today, especially here in the United States, we have government agencies in place to protect children, which was non existent in ancient times, as children were discarded on the trash heap, a practice known as exposing. Today, such a heinous act would likely result in the parents being jailed. It used to be said, variety is the spice of life, but in my estimation, children are the spice of life because they see things simply and innocently. Finally, I will explain the meaning of my selected passage for today and discuss how it addresses the current human situation. In today's world, my selected passage, Mark 10:13 through 16, tells us that Jesus highly regarded and valued children, which is how most of us care about our children today. This passage instructs us to 1, value children, 2, accept Jesus with childlike faith, and 3, continue learning about the kingdom of God and emulating Jesus with the simplicity and innocence of a child. The beginning of this passage highlights the disciples' failure to learn from what Jesus is saying and teaching them as they were instructed in Mark 9:37, whoever welcomes one of these children in my name welcomes me. The disciples forgot those words and attempted to send the children away. Sadly, this situation with the disciples neglecting to learn from what Jesus was saying and teaching them is a lot like us today, whereas we are instructed by the Bible and Jesus. But as James says, anyone who listens to the world but does not do what it says is like someone who looks at his face in a mirror and after looking at himself goes away and immediately forgets what he looks like. Therefore, do not merely listen to the world and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says. In conclusion, Grant Osborne synopsized the passage Mark 10:1 through 16, whereas the emphasis here is on family life in the New Kingdom community. Jesus states that the easy divorce policy advocated by many rabbis was not God's will. Divorce was allowed only because of their stubborn sin. Jesus further teaches that children are models for kingdom living. To enter life with God, all must have childlike faith. In this passage, Jesus expounds on family issues within the community. Family and community are significant entities within the kingdom of God, as the kingdom of God is family and community in a covenant relationship with Him. Within this passage, Jesus dispels the ancient community's belief that women and children have no status within the community. The women are included in Jesus' explanation to the disciples. If a woman divorces her husband and marries another man, she commits adultery, which elevates the status of women in the ancient community. Likewise, when Jesus says, "Let the little children come to me, for the kingdom of God belongs to such as these," it elevates the status of children within the ancient community. The message in Mark 10:13-16 is clear. Accept Jesus with childlike faith. Learn all you can about him through his word. Family and community are utmost, and never forget his commandment: love your neighbor as you love yourself. Thank you for listening to my exegetical presentation on Mark 10:13-16. Have a Merry Christmas, y'all, and Happy New Year, too.